encounter, and what happened to you? And he said evil. He got the distinct feeling whatever was going on with them, the alien abduction with him, supposedly, was evil.
Yeah. That's certainly been happening. Certainly the discussion about the alien abduction issue has been in a little more of a, is an oxymoron, more of a dark light. I hate to use that term, but it seemed when the abduction issue was discussed in the past 20 years, it was a little more toward a non-aggressive examination of the human situation, the human phenomenon. Maybe they're studying us or our society. They're studying our physical being. Whatever was transpiring wasn't really malevolent. So they were just kind of coldly and scientifically studying us. And you're right. Now the narrative seems to be that there's some, I don't know if evil is the right term. I mean, Mr. Parker used that term, and that's the one that fits best for him, in his opinion. But it seems to be a less cold approach, and more like there's kind of a dark side to this scenario. Whatever the actual explanation is, it's interesting how that discussion has turned in more into that point of view, and it kind of extends to what the TTSA is doing. There's a narrative there that's being pushed that the aliens, there's a threat here. There's a military threat from potential visitation from extraterrestrials. That's being pushed as of late. And since that happened, I've been kind of making a cursory examination of a lot of these older cases to find if there's been any data to lead us to that conclusion, and I haven't found any. I haven't found any cases that really stand out, that really grab you and scream out, this is a threat to our existence. This interaction with an ET is a threat to our existence. I haven't come across that yet, so I don't know. But it's interesting how you're right. The conversation has changed a little bit since the Buck Hopkins, this Whitley Strieber communion days of the 80s. It's kind of done a 180, and now it's a little more evil, a little more dark.
Well, I will tell you a little story. My dad, when he was in Korea, my dad served World War II in Korea, and he was waiting in Korea to be discharged. He met this guy, and they became real good friends. Well, the guy turned out later, when he got back into the United States, he became an actor. I'm sure you remember Rockford Files and Maverick.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, that was my dad's best friend. And growing up, this James Gardner, which that's the only name I know him by, rather than, I can't even pronounce his last name, but he would come up every summer and spend a week, and him and my dad would run around and do all kinds of weird things, whatever friends do. And I didn't even know who he was. And when I got a little bit older, I remember James coming up to our house, coming in, and I go, "You look like that guy that plays Maverick on TV." And he goes, "Well, that was me." And I got to know him really well, And I remember when he was doing Rockford, I would call him up every so often, when he was not on set, and we would talk. At one point, I asked James, I said, one of his close friends was Ronald Reagan. And at that time, Ronald Reagan had on his show, once a month, he would do a radio show for young people where you could, call up and talk to the president, ask a question, and he would answer it or try to. I got a phone call, and it was Ronald Reagan. It was the White House, and they said, "Hey, you're going to be on this show. You can talk to Ronald Reagan and ask him a question." I did. I was excited. Of course, I wasn't a kid, but I was a young adult at that point.
Yeah.
But a couple of weeks later, I get a phone call. Now, again, it was arranged with James, and I'm sure Ronald Reagan did it, for his friendship with James. I get a phone call from the White House. Well, here's Ronald Reagan on the phone. So we're talking, and at the time, the newspapers around here were talking about Russia or the Soviet Union. There was like a Cold War going on. They were talking always about, nuclear threats and all this stuff going. And I asked him about Star Wars. I said, is Star Wars going to help us against the Soviet Union? And I remember he goes, "Well, I think it's going to protect. And anyway, he said it's going to protect us against them out there. Now, I think he slipped up because when I try to get him to say out there where, he wouldn't say anything more than that. Well, I kind of forgot about that, and then one day I just remembered, and it hit me what he said, out there. He certainly didn't say over there. And it made me start thinking that Star Wars maybe had two folds to it at one point.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Yeah. I mean, it was sold to the public as a defense system against the Soviets. But would there have been another aspect to it? That's a reasonable assumption. Very reasonable. I mean, Reagan sighted a UFO when he was governor of California, and was clearly comfortable talking about the UFO phenomenon. He mentioned it not directly, but indirectly about the potential for an alien threat in a speech to the United Nations. So he was clearly comfortable with the reality of this enigma. And he's one of several politicians that was comfortable with that. Jimmy Carter had a sighting. Barry Goldwater was very comfortable. He was pushing for the Air Force to release what they knew, which never happened. John Podesta has been pushing for some level of disclosure. So there's been a few politicians down the line from both political sides of the aisle that have been comfortable talking about the issue and have been, at least in a very cursory way, trying to push for some level of disclosure or get the conversation going at least. But that's interesting that Reagan mentioned that. Yeah, he. I can't. There hasn't been a president that's really discussed it directly after him. I mean, I know Barack Obama made some discussion about it on, I think it was on a television talk show here in the States. It's been discussed, matter of factly, but Reagan, his comments about the UFO enigma were serious-minded comments, which I think is a good thing, because you have a political leader, regardless of what you think of his politics, he's one of our leaders and he's discussing this issue in a serious light. I think that's a good thing. Interesting.
It was. And, I gave that a lot of thought. When it hit home with me, it goes, wow. Again, him and Nancy believed in UFOs. They believe in a lot of things that a lot of people, kind of wondered about. But, I can say that, him saying that to me gave me proof in my mind that there is, UFOs. And I'm sure he had, probably more information about UFOs than a lot of presidents did. I know when Clinton first was running for president, one of the news media asked him, well, if you become president, will you disclose UFOs? And he says, yes, we'll get to the bottom of it. We'll tell the American public. Well, guess what? It never happened. Never happened.
No.
And I wonder why. I think they get in office and they're told what they can and can't say on certain things. Up to now, I can say that much.
Yeah. That's a possibility. Yeah, certainly it didn't happen. I recall Jimmy Carter was going to ask NASA to look into the UFO problem, and he did. And the NASA director at the time, and his name escapes me, wrote a letter to President Carter and told him no. So the director of NASA was ordered to examine the UFO problem by the president of the United States, and he told the president no.
Oh, yeah.
That speaks volumes by itself.
It does. And, Carter saw a UFO himself when he was in the Navy.
He did. Actually, I think he the case I'm aware of was he was outside. He was at a Lions Club meeting in Georgia. I'm not sure if he was governor yet or not, but he had a UFO sighting, which actually reported to NICAP by the early 70s. He didn't know what to think of it, and eventually, I think he assigned it to a bolide or the planet Venus. He really didn't grab the extraterrestrial possibility, out of the air. But he's another politician that was clearly somewhat comfortable talking about UFOs, and if our political leaders were more comfortable talking about this phenomenon, that would go a long way towards some level of disclosure and also making the public view this in a more legitimate light, which is already happening, but it needs to happen on a more widespread basis. This needs to be looked at as a serious issue for the planet.
Well, I think so, because one day they're not going to be able to cover it up. Something's going to happen. I mean, just anything, like an asteroid could hit, right? Anywhere, anytime. Yeah. We don't know. Well, something could happen where a UFO could crash, or, something could happen where it landed, where a lot of people saw it. How are they going to cover that one up?
Oh, I agree. I mean, my professional position, which gives me a lot of grief, but my take on that issue is that the government and the military has no motivation at all to release what they may have at this point. But I do think that if an event took place that was awe-inspiring enough, say a non-terrestrial craft landed in the middle of Los Angeles or in Denver, Colorado, or in New York City, that's something you couldn't cover up because it's in your face. It's not like a UFO crashing in outside of Roswell, New Mexico, or a UFO crashing up in the Yukon. This is a metropolitan area, so you would have a huge amount of witnesses from all points of view and all educational backgrounds, and you wouldn't be able to cover that up. It would be out there for all the world to see, and it may take something like that to disclose everything, but that would be a fascinating thing to see. to live through that,
But I remember Orson Welles, War of the Worlds, how people panicked. People actually, there was a farmer, in the Midwest that killed his wife and kids because he thought these aliens were going to come through and, so he thought a humane way that he would, take care of it. Up here in Concrete, Washington, the same time that radio show play was going, they lost their power. And from what I hear from people that lived in, had relatives that lived at that time frame, they were running around the whole area with guns, looking for aliens. I mean, people, sure, I think, would start panicking really fast if one crashed, not even in our country, in the UK or France, Germany, Canada, or in a populated area. You wouldn't be able to cover it up. And I think we'd have mass panicking going on because we don't know if they're friendly at this point. Are they here to serve man and give off orbs, or are they here to serve man like on a barbecue?
Yeah, and you might be right. I mean, my take is a little different. I think there would be some panicking. I don't know if it would be mass panic. That's a possibility. But I think at this point in time, with having several decades gone by since the World of Worlds broadcast, there's been a lot of sci-fi in the media, in television shows, in books, in movies, and people seem clearly more comfortable with the idea that we're not alone. They've kind of accepted the fact that the universe contains other life forms. The dynamic they're not maybe overly comfortable with is, have they come here? Have they visited our planet? So if a UFO crashed, you're right. We don't know if they're friendly or not. We don't know anything about them because they're alien. By definition, that means we don't know. They're not from here. So we don't know how they would act toward us. So I think at the very least there would be some level of panic. It may not be mass panic, but there would be millions of people that would be very uncomfortable with that and may start acting in a kind of an out-of-bounds way. But you're right.
Okay, I'm going to have to put you on hold. We got to go to the break for the radio stations. We'll be back with William Pullen right after some breaks and all that stuff.
We are not alone in this universe. It's a thought that rings true. Ancient cave dwellers drew spacecraft on the walls. It's a recurring